So instead of having a mission, I had to realize, no, I'm serving a mission. So having a mission is also a thing of ego. I had to let go of that.
What if the future isn't about achieving our mission? Rather, it's about serving it. And what happens if we shift from control and achievement to collaboration, imagination, and even service? And what if we were to change how we think about energy, how we think about power, leadership, and maybe even ourselves? In this episode of Sense Making Conversations, I'm joined by Arash Aazami, energy futurist, systems thinker, and founder of the Universal Right to Energy Initiative. Arash believes that energy isn't just a commodity, it's the currency of our universe. It's the way that we design value. And ultimately, it's the story we tell about who gets to create and who gets left out. Together, we explore why our systems aren't broken. They're working exactly as they have been designed to. And that's the problem, because the real change won't come from patching the old system, but from building or maybe imagining an entirely new one. Stay with us until the end, because I'm going to share the key takeaways from today's episode and help you make sense of it all. I'm Andrea Sampson, and this is Sense Making Conversations. Welcome, Arash. It's so good to see you.
It's wonderful to see you.
Now, I know you and I have known each other for a very long time, but so many of our listeners probably don't know much about you. Let's start with your story. How did you get into this place, into energy systems and the work that you do, which is so meaningful in the world?
That's a very good question, and it's difficult to answer shortly, but I was educated as a musician. I was raised in a Persian Dutch household in West Africa. So we had 4 languages and 3 cultures. And after that, we came to the Netherlands. I was educated as a musician. After that, I went to the US, made music there for a while, ended up learning about Silicon Valley and the internet revolution taking place there. Came back to Europe, started an online business. This was in the 90s, so nobody was actually really online at that time. So we were just a little bit ahead of the curve. It was a roller coaster. I learned a lot. And in 2006, I actually had my first task in the energy system. And that has been an adventure ever since. So that's almost 20 years ago. And I've been involved in the energy transition ever since.
Amazing. I didn't realize Persian Dutch household with 4 languages, 4 or 5. That's incredible. I mean, that must have given you such a different perspective on the world, right? You've got different cultures, different languages. We interact differently. And I know you from the energy sector. I know you from the sustainable energy sector. And, those are some of the most complex systems in the world and some of the most important systems that we have. And perspective is really important in those systems because when we are shifting from something that is so entrenched into something that is, new and challenging the way in which we show up and the way in which we actually interact. I mean, here in Canada, being a country that is one of the largest providers of fossil fuels, it's an ongoing challenge. But for you, what did you learn about how these systems are built? And how did that perspective that coming from such a unique background gave you?
As I grew up, I never realized that my background had some uniqueness to it. To me, it was just what it was. And, so we'd live in Niger in West Africa. Our parents were doing development work there in the medical field. And for the first 3 years, we literally lived in the last row of houses before the Sahara Desert. So that was about 1,000 kilometers away from the capital, from Niamey, in a town called Agadez. So you could say we had a view. It would extend for a couple thousand kilometers if you try your best. So the household was basically, it was me, my brother, and our parents. And later on, our younger brother was born, Sarouche. This was in the 80s. And my parents had met in Dubai. So my father had come from Iran. My mother came from the Netherlands. The language that they shared among the two of them was English. The language of Niger is French. So we had Persian, Dutch, French, and English in our household. So it was a bit eclectic. And I guess as a kid, either you develop some serious issues or you deal with it. and we dealt with. So we had to, we had to learn all these languages. So that was interesting. And the thing is that I later on realized that yes, growing up in a situation like that actually provides you the ability to shift perspectives on things easily. I also had to learn later on that for many people, it isn't that easy. So to step out of your own paradigm and look at things from another perspective for a while helps you understand. And I somehow turned into a translator of perspectives for the energy system.
That's really interesting. A translator of systems. So, I mean, these are complex systems. And in being a translator, you likely did a lot of optimization of those systems because you were able to understand them in ways that other people didn't. Would that be true? Would you agree with that? You sort of were in that optimization role?
Well, you said it as if the optimization already has taken place. I think we're still on the way. So, yes, but it does help. For instance, you were mentioning Canada and your system in Canada, and Canada being one of the primary fossil fuel providers to the rest of the world, but also one of the largest energy users per capita in the world. If you look at it from that perspective, for instance, the average Canadian has an energy footprint, an annual energy footprint that is around 3 times that of the average Chinese, 10 times that of the average Indian, and 100 times that of the average Malinese or Nigerian.
Wow.
So, if you would wish for a world with energy equity, and let's say Canada is going to manage to cut its own energy use by 50%. For energy equity to occur globally, that would mean that somebody in Niger would be allowed to use 50 times more energy.
So, first of all, I have so many questions from that. What is it that drives Canadian energy usage? When you say energy usage, is that energy per fossil fuel energy? Is that all energy? And then why is it an important measure? Like, what is it about being the largest energy user in the world? Is that good or is that bad? And why?
Great question. What I think is, so let's zoom out. Let's zoom out for a
Mhm.
minute. What is energy? Energy is the ability to do things. Energy is potential. So that means that any form of value, any form of progress that we can imagine occurs because there is energy.
Mhm.
More precisely, because we have the ability to convert energy from one form into another. Let's say we convert some inherent form of energy inhabited in molecules into kinetic energy. We can make wheels move because of that. So that's where we create value. But also the electrical energy that we transform into, for instance, computing power. And then there's going to be a lot of residual heat, and we'll need to figure out to do something about that also. So that's one of these perspectives that I try to look at. Energy, you can regard it as the fundamental currency of the universe. Every form of value that we can imagine, and even every form of progress and value that has occurred before we existed as humans, has to do with energy, ever since the Big Bang, at least. So, for 13.5 billion years, progress has relied on energy. And that makes it really interesting because you can regard energy as a fundamental currency of the universe. Every form of value that you can imagine has been created because there was energy and because we could transform energy from one form into another. And even in nature, that's how it works. Plants catch energy from the sun, they transform it into usable forms of energy for the ecosystems that they're a part of. They share it amongst each other, and therefore progress happens. So, if you look at energy from that perspective, you can understand that, we believe that money is very important, but it's very possible to run an energy system if there would be no banks. It is absolutely impossible to run a bank if there would be no energy system. And therefore, energy is fundamental. And that's why we somehow realize deep down that energy is something different than, for instance, coffee, although both are traded on commodity markets.
So coming back to the, sort of that bigger picture, which was around energy usage and the largest users versus the smallest users. And what I heard you say, and I think is really interesting, is that, energy is the largest driver of innovation, of creation, right? Like when we have energy, we are able to create. And we've seen that, of course, all through history. The more that we were able to harness our environment, and we did that with energy usage in some form. We grew as a species. And here we are on the brink of, we don't know what right now, but we know we're in a very rapid growth cycle right now. And certainly the work that you and I have both done with a Singularity University, would talk about it as, the exponential curve. Like we are on the upside of that exponential curve and going faster and faster. And the ability to harness energy, the ability to have access to energy. When we look at those largest users versus the smallest users, are we seeing a system that is supporting the innovation that the energy usage would say is possible?
Are we supporting a system that allows for systemic progress to occur? That's basically what you're asking. And, making oneself obsolete for a system seems to be one of the most difficult things, if not impossible. So there will be external forces that will change the system. We're witnessing that right now with energy. So, as I mentioned, the average inhabitant of sub Saharan Africa has an annual energy budget of around 100 of the average Canadian or a US citizen or Western European. That's unfair. That means that they have only 1% of the ability to create value on an energetic level as compared to somebody who lives where we live. And in the meantime, we do expect their contributions to the global economy, to progress of mankind, to innovation, and to all these other things. And that's practically impossible. So, on the one hand, I am assured that we globally will be using a lot more energy in the coming decades. I also believe that that's a good thing. Also, if you look at fossil fuels, to be on par with the planet, we need to cut fossil fuel consumptions by a factor of 1 million. That's crazy, crazy amount because it took the Earth around 500 million years to build up the reserves that we know in coal and oil and gas, geological processes, converting plants and animals into oil and coal and gas. It takes us around 500 years to finish that amount. So 500 million years versus 500 years means a factor of 1 million. So that literally means that if you want to keep on driving a fuel powered car, combustion engine, you'll have to find a way to do not 15 kilometers for 1 liter of fuel, but 15 million kilometers for 1 liter of fuel. And that's practically impossible. So that means that we need to go ahead and redesign the entire system for mobility and the entire system for energy. It is just impossible to keep on going using fossil fuels.
And I think we're seeing, vehicles, of course, are one abuser of energy, certainly from the fossil fuels perspective. And we've got large corporations who are very vested in ensuring that we continue to use fossil fuels. At the same time, we've got steep competition that's happening in real time, and we're seeing that every day with the various electronic vehicle manufacturers. But I mean, it's a bigger system. And when we look at where is the biggest drain of energy, and we know it's not vehicles, although that is one area. But certainly when we look at from again, I go back to what you talked earlier, which is energy begets innovation. And innovation is one of the largest consumers of energy. And we see that in these large data centers that are being built, and whether it be Bitcoin mining or all of these innovative, actually new technologies that 5, 10 years ago didn't even exist, and we didn't even have an idea that they would exist, are becoming some of the biggest users of energy. And the system, I mean, a lot of them are moving to battery. We are seeing that. But are we just swapping out one broken system for another because we start looking at the impact of the earth of batteries as an example? And we have another issue. We get into precious metals and volatile metals, and then we get into things like human abuse because many of these metals are being mined in areas that have human rights violations. So here we have an energy, and we can talk about energy all day, but really what we're talking about is the system itself that is helping us to either change or stay stuck. So tell me a little bit about that because I think that's an area that you've had, if I recall, a lot of interactions with and maybe a lot of issues with. So tell me a little bit about this system that is keeping us stuck.
Yes. So if you look at the system, the design of the energy system is based on an extraction of resources. And if we try to innovate the system while keeping the pattern of extracting and exploiting, it's not going to change fundamentally. So if we exchange the extraction and exploitation of oil fields for the extraction and exploitation of lithium, that's not going to make a change in the world. The energy transition is not about technology alone. Surely technology is one of the pillars upon which we are making the transition, but there's four pillars. So the first one being technology, the second one is the economy. We need to rethink our economic models because the economical dynamics that we are looking at right now, which is a lot about ownership and a lot about a deficit between supply and demand, because that's where you can make your margin, they're not going to work anymore once you make the shift to renewables at full scale.
Hmm.
Then the third pillar is the social or societal pillar, which means that you and I will be connected differently if we are no longer both consumers from one large corporation, but
Hmm.
prosumers producing and using at the same time, and also offering all kinds of services and roles and functions on the energy system ourselves because we are owners of energy generating assets, energy storing assets, energy management systems, etc., etc. So our social role, the fabric of our society is changing because of that. And that brings us to the fourth pillar, which is the institutional pillar. We need to rewrite rules and regulations. The law has to change. So we have to redesign the markets. We have to redesign how we deal with societies and let them grow and thrive. And we have to redesign our laws and regulations. And I don't think that technology itself is the bottleneck. The bottleneck that we are looking at right now is a lot more in the social and the economic models that we are applying.
When we were chatting a few days back, one of the things you said to me that stuck with me, and it just came up as you were talking, which was you said, the system is doing exactly what it was designed to do.
Exactly.
And, what is it designed to do then? What is the function of the system that we're living within?
The system is designed to yield profits from deficits between supply and demand. That's what the system
Right.
is designed for. That means that it has to make a distinction between who is an owner, who is allowed to own something, who is allowed to use it, exploit it, and sell whatever comes out of it and earn its profits. And that's why we have a regulated energy system in many countries in the world. And we got very accustomed to that. And before the Industrial Revolution, it wasn't like that. Energy was practically everywhere. The thing was, we did not have it on demand. We had no control over where is the energy, when is the energy there, and in what form can we make use of that energy. So the time, the place, and the modality, we didn't have any control over that. We did gain that control once we made the shift to fossil fuels. That is what has propelled the progress of humankind for a century and a half. This is what we have to be thankful for the era of fossil fuels, because it enabled us for the first time to have energy on demand and harness time, place, and modality. So that allowed for the industrial revolution to occur, for the internet to be there, et cetera, et cetera. And now we're making the shift back to renewables, but on the premises of harnessing time, place, and modality. And that is the big shift that we are looking at right now, because that means that by design, this shift will redesign our economies. It will redesign how our society works.
Well, what I heard you say, and I think it's so interesting, when you're designing employment incentives, let's just say, you need to decide what you're incenting for because that's the behavior that you will get, right? So if you want more sales, ensure that you're incenting sales, and that's the behavior that you will get. If we look at the system, the incentive within the system is the gap between supply and demand, right? Because that's where profit lives. When there's a gap, profits are higher. So the
Yes.
system is designed to always ensure that there is a gap between supply and demand. That's where the regulatory comes from. So from a fossil fuels perspective, it's very easy to do that because it is a physical resource that you can hold back or put into the system depending on what's required. When we get into renewables, I mean, there is a physicality to it, but it gets more difficult, correct? Am I on the right page here? Am I kind of going down the right road?
Absolutely. And the thing is, if you just follow the path of logic, everybody will get there. We get it, collectively we do. And there's a lot that makes us believe that we don't. But that's because there is a lot of profit in making us believe that we don't get it.
Right.
So you were mentioning the gap between supply and demand being the primary driver for profit making. That means that we are being rewarded for imbalance in the system. From an ecological standpoint, that means that we are always, by design, sub-optimizing the entire system because that's where the profit is. We created a model a couple years ago called benefits for balance, which basically was a redesign of economic models for energy systems, which meant that it's no longer about who has energy and who hasn't, and then the one is selling energy to the other. But let's just assume, okay, energy is there, it flows, and as long as it flows, value can be created out of it. So what we need to do is we need to incentivize actors on the system to ensure that there's always balance and always flow of energy. So we did this benefits for balance modeling first, and then we applied it in a small community. And we noticed that suddenly the behavior shifted from desiring to get the maximum to attaining the optimum. So instead of wanting as much as you can, because that's where you make your profit, you wanted just enough. And everybody wanted just enough because that's how they achieved balance for the entire system, which meant that their benefit was the highest.
Change your incentive, right? You want different behavior, change the incentive.
Yeah, it's changing the underpinning market mechanics. And we can't because the market models that we have are designed by humans. We can redesign them.
But we're not. We're not redesigning these, right? Profits are too great when there's an imbalance in power. When there is more demand than there is supply, profits are greater. Or at least that's the perspective. Is that true?
Yes, that is the perspective. But what would I choose if I were in a position to make profit? Would I want a virtual number on a screen to get larger and larger? Or would I want access to the one thing that actually enables me to create value? So, do I want a larger and larger virtual value number on a screen, which is dollars or euros or whatever it is? Or do I want access to an abundance of energy? Always opt for the latter.
Right. Right. Except that we're not given that choice. And I think that this is the challenge, as a scientist, as an academic, as somebody who works in the system every day. This has got to feel very futile because again, living in a country that is one of the largest providers of fossil fuels and yet also has access to sustainably generated power that is beyond what we even know, and yet we choose not to actually delve into that as a country. We shy away from it. It's frustrating. I mean, I see that all the time. I mean, we've harnessed Niagara Falls literally and use hydroelectric power, and we have an abundance of it. And yet the province that I live in, we don't get access to that power. It gets shipped outside of their country. It's a challenging thing. So tell me a little bit about what it has done to you as a scientist and as an academic watching some of these decisions that are being made and trying to impact them. I know your work and I know that you speak internationally, you are an advocate for sustainable energy and for shifting the system. And yet the system is stuck. So tell me what that has done to you.
Well, first, I'm not a scientist or an academic, actually. I'm a dropout. I really am. But I have an academic approach to this matter. So that I do. A lot of that has to do with mindset. So there's the mindset of the seeker. The seeker is always certain that they can never be certain. I guess that's one of the ways through which I approach the energy system. I'm always certain that I don't know and that I don't understand it fully, which means that I always learn. If you look at the energy market as it is right now, it does seem to be a masquerade because it is about upholding power structures that are actually already obsolete. If you look at the amount of sunlight that is required to power all of humanity's energy needs, everything, industries, transportation, mobility, heating, electricity, everything, I think that amounts to around an hour and a half per year out of the 8,760 hours that we have per year. So if we could only harness like the tiniest percentage, you can supply all of humanity out of that. The thing is, do we choose to do that with technologies that have to rely on scarce resources again, like lithium or cobalt? Or do we allow ourselves to find ways to do this in an ecological manner, just like how ecosystems thrive? I spend a lot of time in the woods. I spend a lot of time in nature, and I am involved with agroforestry and with permaculture. And what I find so beautiful and so inspiring in these systems is that they are self balancing by design and self-diversifying. So, if you have a lawn that only has grass and you'll leave it alone, it will become a forest. And I just love that principle. What we need is energy forests. We need diversity. We need to allow, by design, for diversity to be there in our energy systems. Diversity in roles and functions. So any individual should be allowed to not only use energy, but also offer energy, harvest energy, store energy, convert energy, manage energy, transport energy. Because if you allow every user to do that, you'll get a very wide palette of technologies and social models and economical models that will allow for a far more resilient energy system to occur, just as we have with ecosystems, with biological ecosystems. So I believe that that's one very important aspect. We have to learn to invest in diversity and diversification. We have to embrace diversity, and we have to embrace autonomy and the sovereignty that every user has. Because I do believe that ultimately energy should not be a product, it should be a right, a human right. Every human being needs energy on a day to day basis. And only by considering it to be a human right, which means that we need to rewrite Article 25 of the Universal Declaration at the UN, we can actually make sure that we develop our policies and our market models in such a way that every human being does not have to rely on, I would say, perverse power structures
Mm.
to fulfill their primary needs.
Arash, you care about this a lot. You care about this deeply. I feel that from you. And you've been at this for a while. What's been the cost for you?
Oh my god. Yeah, the cost has been big. It's been a sacrifice. I've been through 2 burnouts. I had my last one last year. I'm still recovering actually. And it was actually it's cleansing in a way because these situations, although they are difficult and painful, they do provide the opportunity to clean up oneself. So what I had was I got into a situation where I was trying to set up a startup because I thought, okay, there's momentum now for that systemic shift. So I set up a startup during COVID and it kind of failed. Commercially, it failed. Culturally, it failed. And last year, I had to make the decision that I had to clean up the house. And, I did not discontinue the business. It's still there. It's somewhat dormant. There's no working team in it anymore. And it was difficult. And I found myself in a situation where I was juggling like 6 balls at the same time. And I'm not so good at juggling. And, I was doing all these jobs and I wasn't really good at any one of them, which means that the one thing that I would have been very good at, I had no energy for anymore or no time for anymore. So you're eating yourself up in these situations. And the thing that I realized that summer, the summer of 24, was that my wife proposed to me, okay, we'll have to make this a reset summer. So we're going to go to France. We're going to sit at a lake. You're going to bring a guitar. You're going to look at that lake and whatever comes up, but allow for it. And I did. So I sat there with my guitar and I realized, wait a minute. For so many years, I've been telling myself that I have a mission, and having a mission is not healthy because if there's a fair chance that the mission is not going to succeed, it means that someone's life is not going to succeed. My life would have not succeeded. Having a mission means that I have to fulfill every task, also the ones that I don't like or I'm not good at with regards to that mission. So instead of having a mission, I had to realize, no, I'm serving a mission. So having a mission is also a thing of ego. I had to let go of that. I had to let go of the ambition of fulfilling the mission on my own because it's never going to happen.
That is such a powerful realization. I just want to come back to that. I don't have a mission. I'm serving a mission. And that, as entrepreneurs, as change makers, as impact makers, as experts, we look at the world through the lens of how can we create something better than the place we have right now. And so we have this belief that it's our mission. But the reframe, tell me about that reframe when you go from I have a mission, I must do, to I serve a mission, I must show up.
Yes. Like, you're saying that actually more beautiful than I could. But that's true. I mean, that is the truth. The thing is the big difference between having a mission and serving a mission is that when you serve a mission, you can serve it within your own capacities, your own capability, your talents, your disposition, and within what brings you joy.
Yeah.
So that was a tremendous liberation to be of service to a mission so grand and so large. And there's many people who are actually serving that mission globally.
You're not alone.
No.
And, burnout is one of those things one of my earlier episodes, I spoke with Dr. Ann Kahn, and she talked a lot about the physiological impact on our brain of burnout. And it is an actual physiological disorder, but it comes from an overworking of various parts of our brain, and they become in a looped system, and they can't stop. And so that idea of doing versus serving, of having versus being, it's an important distinction because I think there's many of us who are stuck in the, well, what can I do now? What can I do next? I need to achieve my mission and I need to keep doing it. And there's a loneliness, like you said, that goes along with it because when you have a mission, it feels very solitary. What was the moment that got you there? You're sitting at the lake and like what was the confluence of events that happened that you were able to sort through in that beautiful moment by a lake with a guitar that allowed you to see that?
So the moment itself was liberating, absolutely. The process towards the moment was very painful because it literally got to the point where, I had many of the typical symptoms of burnout. So, I got skin problems, tinnitus in one ear that became so loud that I couldn't listen to conversations anymore. And then one morning I woke up and I couldn't move my arm anymore. So, it's your body says, stop it, and it's a hard stop. And even in that moment, I convinced myself of pushing through because it was so important that I did this one thing and this one thing and that one thing and all these one things. And there's always so many one things.
Yes.
So that was not the point of catharsis, really. I think, and I'm still in the process, but I think that the point of catharsis was when I was at that lake with my guitar, and suddenly it dawned onto me, yes, I serve that mission. And within servitude to that mission, my task is to limit myself to the things that I am good at and be honest to myself and therefore to others about it, and within the boundaries of what I feel joy with when I do them. And I can expand that during my recovery, but not right at the beginning. So I'll have to limit myself first. And I did. And one of the things that brings me a lot of joy is to spend time with groups of people and share stories and perspectives on the energy system. The work that I did as a speaker actually always brought me joy, always. And because it brings me joy, that energy is shared with the audience and it's picked up. And I do know for a fact that in quite some cases, it has had an influence on life's choices that people make, on career choices, on becoming of service to that same mission, for example, which isn't that wonderful? Isn't that beautiful? So by sharing joy, you get joy back. So that was one thing. And the other was, okay, I need to let go of my ambition of trying to be a successful entrepreneur whilst changing a mission. I don't need to because I've been an entrepreneur before. If it would be necessary, I'd do it. But if it's not necessary, if I can be of service in any other form, I don't know, work for an NGO, work together with innovators, coach people, build stuff in my garage. I don't care. But if that is within what can I do? What am I good at? What do I have to give? And do I feel joy whilst doing it? Do it.
I love that. I love that, what I'm hearing is you're moving away from that feeling that you have to persuade or convince the world to be different, the system that's broken and trying to get people to listen that it's broken and we need to change. And, that conversation is heavy and hard because we're talking, it's a persuasive conversation and no one person can actually persuade anyone, especially not a system. You can't change a system with one person. It takes many.
It's not designed to accommodate those who try to change it.
No. And you're moving from that trying to change the system to creating, to imagining with joy what could be. And what I love about that is that it is what one individual can do. I can imagine the system from my perspective. And if I'm standing at the front of a room of, 100 people, 1,000 people, 10,000 people, well, we can all imagine together and we can create power from that place of imagination. And we can create joy in looking at what could be, even when it isn't. It may not be now, but in the moment, we're all in that, and we've all experienced that. We've been in a room where we have a shared vision, we create a shared story, and we walk out feeling so much better even though nothing has changed. And I think that's the reframing that has to happen within the system, because the system, we live in a world right now where there's a lot of talk about, let's go back to when it was great, when it was good, when, let's go back. And we know
It wasn't.
it wasn't great. There wasn't, and we can't go back. We can't. We can only go forward. And that place of joy, that's the energy that moves us forward. We started this conversation talking about energy and about it being the most important resource really in our entire existence. It is what allows us as humans to even exist.
Yes.
And what I've heard from you through this conversation is that we've gotten so caught up in the system of energy that we've forgotten about our own power to create energy.
Absolutely. Yeah, agree. Agree. And so that power is within us. It's instilled within us. We are energy. We are energy and matter. That's what makes us human or carbon based. And all the energy that we have is potential to change things within whatever we can. And all of us have that. So that means that we can choose to be connected to the abundance that nature and the universe have for us and to make good use of that. We can choose to be conscious of that. We can choose to be conscious of the fact that although there is a system that is very powerful or seems very powerful, that does a lot to uphold itself, we do all as individuals have the power to make our own system, all of us. And we can do that together. So a part of my job now is to bring together these people, the change makers for systemic shifts. And we do that in the form of hackathons and parties and gatherings, and they're beautiful.
It sounds a whole lot more fun than, running a startup where you're trying to change the system from the inside.
Yes, and what makes it so fun is that you basically get to create your own sandbox where you can allow for nonconformity to be a virtue. And that goes for all of us. So yes, we have a belief system, we have design principles, we have all these things that we share, but in the end it's about us all finding the joy in making things that may work. And there's this beautiful quote by Richard Buckminster Fuller: "You don't change things by fighting the existing reality. If you want to change something, build a new model that makes the old model obsolete." And what we really attempt to do is building these new models. I get to choose. I mean, I have an energy intake of around 1.3 kilowatt hours per day in the form of food and drinks and whatever. I get to spend those 1.3 kilowatt hours once. Either I spend them on moaning about, what's wrong with the world, or I spend them on trying to build something that may or may not work, but something that I believe in, something, that brings me joy. If we multiply that, if this particular concept goes somewhat viral and people start to find their own power in building these new models that make old models obsolete, that means that we are changing the system because we are substituting it. We're not fighting it. We're substituting it by something better. And this is exactly what we're attempting to do and what many people are attempting to do. And by now, I kind of find a lot of joy in bringing these people together.
Yeah, what I hear in what you're saying, and I mean, I think it's so powerful, is that when we move away from these old systems that are there, and they're still going to be operating. Like we're not going to change everything, but we can imagine something new. And in the imagining of it, we've already created a change, and we've already expended our own power and our own energy, but it's a much more joyful energy because we're in a space of creation. And what I think is powerful about that is that, we hear all the time we live in uncertain times, and that is true. These are very uncertain times. And yet, that is the power of the times that we live in because we get to choose what we want to create. And even if what we choose isn't what eventually gets created, in the moment of our idea of creating it, we've had the joy of that creation. And that propels us just a little bit further.
Absolutely. And in terms of mindset, these are times of great uncertainty, but equally of great opportunity. So if we can tune ourselves into recognizing the opportunity of the crisis that we're in, we're going to be builders of the new reality.
Yeah. Yeah. You know, from this place where you are now, you're recovering from burnout. You are imagining a new path forward for yourself in service of a mission, not achieving a mission. What advice would you give somebody who is in still in that, creating a mission or solving a mission? What advice would you give them to maybe just put their head up? What's the first step forward?
Start gardening.
Mm.
Because when I'm gardening, I realize I can yell at my plants as much as I'd like. It's not going to make them grow faster or better. You have to provide the opportunity for these organisms to thrive, and then they will, or they won't. And the soil will tell you what it needs. If I really want a certain kind of plant and I put it there and it's not going to thrive, apparently the soil is not going to be, it does not benefit from that plant being there, which means it tells me, okay, change something, nudge it. And by now, after a couple of years of permaculture gardening, I learned that the only thing really that we need to do is nudge it a little bit. And by now, I have this little town garden that provides so much food and beauty and flowers and biodiversity. And I counted, I think, 107 different species of plants last year. And this
Wow.
is only after 3 or 4 years of permaculture gardening, and it just goes by itself, and it's self-balancing. So just by connecting, that already helps so much. Second piece of advice would be go outside, because even though you may still be lonely, you're going to be among a lot more lonely people, which means that you're going to find opportunities to bring them joy. And by sharing your compassion, your love, and your desires with them, you're going to make a change in their lives also. So I do believe that, we're not going to overcome anxiety by turning into ourselves. We're going to overcome that by being of service to others.
Beautiful. It's a hard time right now for those who are really deeply committed to creating societal change. And certainly when we look at the change makers and the experts, that's really who are getting burned out, and we're seeing it all over the place. And
Yes.
so I love your advice, find the thing that allows you to connect deeply with something outside of yourself, whether that be gardening. I recently took up pottery and I've learned how hard it is. But similar to your gardening, it is something that I get to create and gives me joy and allows me to get outside of myself and forget for the moment all the things that are happening that I have no control over, and find that joy in whatever it is that you're doing, and then go outside and connect with other people. I don't think there has been a time in our world where community isn't more needed or wanted. We need to be together as humans. We've had a very challenging time of being separated, and I think your advice of go and find each other. Even if you don't know that person, talk to them and you'll find they maybe have a message for you or you have a message for them, or they give you an insight that just unlocks something for you.
Absolutely. It's in the interactions with others that we find context, and it's within the context that we find value. So that means that, if you feel useless, connect to other people. You'll find where you're of use. If you feel pointless or purposeless, same, connect to others, connect to nature, connect to systems, connect to the soil, connect to the air, connect to the elements, connect to music, connect to vibration, connect to energy. And it all works so beautifully. It is a mind shift though, because I've been working a lot on mindset these past few years, and I do think that, in times of systemic change, we need different mindsets. One of them being the seeker that I already mentioned, always being certain that you're never certain, but also the artists. We don't need to become artists, but to awaken the artist mindset that's all within us, which is looking at realities, understanding that we can translate those into different tangible realities, and therefore understand them differently and better. And creating narratives that appeal to people. That is one. And then the third is the hacker's mindset. And I love the hacker's mindset because, what does a hacker do ultimately? They're never going to wait for the circumstances to change. They're going to use whatever they have to make the change that they desire. And that's what I love. Sometimes we need to find those hacks. We need to find those hacks and move forward collectively towards something that's going to make billions of us happier.
Yeah. I think that is powerful. And as I listened to that, I was just thinking, the seeker, the artist, the hacker, the seeker is the wanderer, the one who is always looking for something more, the artist who is appreciating what is, and the hacker who's choosing to solve the problem so that we can go deeper. And I mean, really, all of this to me, as somebody who lives daily in story, it's about creating new stories for ourselves, right? That's what we're doing. And I think that concept of serving a mission, it's about writing our story so that the service we give is bringing us the joy that we want, whether we are the seeker, the artist, or the hacker. We get to choose. And sometimes we're all of those things, we move through those. And so as you look out now from this place of change and of deeply grounding into who you are now and serving a mission, how do you feel about the systems that we have, and what are you most hopeful about as you look forward?
It is that through some of the innovations that we have embraced over the past decades, we have been able to make hope a lot more actionable for many more people. That's what I'm hopeful about. Because hope is, I hope, something that all of us possess. But to put hope into action brings joy and makes change. By now, we have between 5.5 billion and 6 billion people globally that are connected to the internet, for example. 50 years ago, it was 36 people. So imagine we have access to forms of intelligence and calculating power that we could have not imagined a decade ago. In terms of mobility, we are making the shift very quickly. In terms of the part of the energy system that is directly coming from renewable resources, we are making the shift very quickly. If we're looking at the integration of different functions in local energy system, that again is going very, very quickly. The compound annual growth rate for battery power globally is around 140%. So that means that the market for batteries grows 140% per year. So if you just look at the numbers and the facts, you know that the shift is already occurring. We are already past the tipping point. Making hope actionable is attuning ourselves to a different role towards the energy system and towards each other, and therefore forming energy communities, because they are energy communities ultimately are about synergies. They're about being together more than the sum of our parts. And that's exactly what we're doing with nature, with natural resources, with abundant energy resources, with many, many, many more ways of developing technologies and other models and economical models that are going to change the world for the better. And I think that, in times of higher uncertainty, the world itself becomes a living lab, and we're all part of it. And I find that beautiful.
That is beautiful, Arash. You know what? I listen to you and I hear the words like hope and joy and creativity and imagination. These are these are the building blocks of life. They are what set us free. The lie we've been told for so long is that they don't belong in the work we do. And it's time to change that, I think. Business is only now beginning to open up to hope and joy and recognizing that without them, we all burn out. We all shut
We do.
down. We lose purpose. So thank you for reminding us all of that.
Thank you for helping us with that. And the thing is, it is in the interaction that the magic occurs. So thank you. And also, just what you just said, I find that beautiful, because what you said with that one particular remark is being a seeker, an artist, or a hacker was not regarded to be a job. At most it was a hobby, sometimes a nuisance. But now they are jobs, and we can make them jobs.
We can make them our life's work
Exactly.
and in service of something bigger.
Exactly.
Beautiful.
Isn't that beautiful?
Arash, this has been an incredible conversation. Is there any last words you'd like to say to our
I think
listeners?
these were the last words. Thank you so much, Andrea.
Now, how can our listeners stay in touch with you and the work that you're doing?
So find me on LinkedIn. That's a very easy one. I'm not so active on socials, but I love being in touch with other people. And if there's an opportunity for me to visit the friends in Canada, I would love that. So yeah, let's make that happen.
I would love to see you come here and spread some of that joy on this side of the world. Arash,
Oh,
this
I would
has
love that.
been a wonderful, wonderful conversation. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you. Thanks a lot.
Reflecting on that conversation with Arash, what strikes me is that transformation doesn't start with tearing down the old systems. It begins by reimagining what we're here to serve and how. As I deeply connect in with what Arash said, I'm struck by the takeaways. First, Arash shows us that the system isn't broken. It's working the way it was designed to. It's extracting, concentrating, and controlling. But if we want something different, we're going to need to redesign the logic that's used to build that system. Because when we do that, the entire system changes. He shows us that it's not about having a mission, it's about serving one. I loved this concept. We get so focused on doing that we forget that our power often comes from sitting deeply with who we are and serving from a place of gratitude. What he showed us is that when we make that shift from ego to service, it frees us from burnout and it opens the door to collaboration, imagination, and most importantly, contribution. Arash also showed us that joy is a renewable energy. When we find ourselves on the brink of burnout, it's because we've been trying to push the old world uphill. I know I've felt like that recently. So when we let joy emerge and when we build from what brings us alive, and we do that in service to something larger than ourselves, we find that burnout isn't the only option. In fact, joy becomes the thing that we live for. And finally, imagination can be an infrastructure. I love that so many people are now living in these words of joy and hope and imagination. And as Arash said, we can spend our energy moaning about what's wrong, or we can spend it building something we believe in. Because by using our imagination as infrastructure, we're actually giving ourselves the scaffolding to build the future that we want. And if you're like me and spend a lot of time thinking about the future that we're creating, this is one little piece of information that has a profound impact on everything we do, because our imagination is what we use to build the stories that we tell ourselves that we eventually create into reality. So what story are you telling yourself right now? And what little piece of imagination could act as a scaffolding from a story that maybe is taking you to the horror movie to a story that would take you to that feel-good movie that would have you smiling all day? And this is why I do sense-making conversations, because it helps us to step back from the noise, to reflect on what really matters, and to reimagine how we want to show up in shaping what comes next. And if this episode sparked something in you, please share it and subscribe, because these are conversations that help us to make sense together. What made sense for you in this episode? Tell me what you actually are trying to make sense of right now and who you'd like to hear from. Drop a comment below and I'll make sure to get back to you personally. I'm Andrea Sampson, and this has been Sense Making Conversations. Thanks for listening.